They thought I was confused. They said it to each other right in front of me, the way people talk around a dog they assume can't understand words. I was 68 years old. I had built 2 businesses from nothing, raised a daughter on my own after her mother passed, paid off a house in Kelowna that backed onto the water. I had done the taxes for our household every single year for 31 years without missing a filing deadline once. But the moment I started repeating myself at dinner, and I did repeat myself because I was tired, because I was grieving in a way I hadn't admitted yet, my wife decided I was losing my mind, and she told her son, and her son told his wife, and the 3 of them sat around my kitchen table one Sunday afternoon and made plans. I heard every word. The bedroom door was open just enough. I'd come back early from my walk because my knee was acting up, the old hockey injury, the one that gets worse every October when the cold rolls in off Okanagan Lake. I had taken off my boots at the back door, the way I always do, and I was walking down the hall in my socks when I heard my wife's voice saying, "The question is timing." I stopped. My son-in-law said something I couldn't make out fully. Then I heard my wife again. "He's not going to fight it. You know how he gets. He just goes quiet." She wasn't wrong about that. I do go quiet. I always have. My father was the same way. We're not men who shout. We're men who think and wait and then act when the moment is right. I backed down the hall. I put my boots back on. I went outside and sat in the truck for 45 minutes watching the lake, thinking. That was a Thursday. I didn't say a word to anyone for 2 weeks. Her name is Lynette. We met at a charity auction in Penticton 11 years ago. She was wearing a green dress, and she laughed at something the auctioneer said before anyone else in the room caught the joke. I thought, that's a woman who pays attention. I was right about that, just not in the way I hoped. She had a son, Brendan, from her first marriage. Brendan was 34 when I married his mother, and he had never once in the entire 11 years called me anything other than my first name. Which is fine. I never expected him to call me Dad. But I did expect basic decency. I thought we had an understanding. I was wrong about that too. The situation was this. 3 years before, I had been diagnosed with early-stage macular degeneration in my left eye. It affects my reading, especially in low light. I started asking Lynette to read things aloud to me sometimes, contracts, mail, the fine print on things. At some point, she started answering my emails for me when I was tired in the evenings. I let it happen because it was easier. I trusted her. That was my mistake. Not trusting her without watching. What I didn't know was that over 14 months she had been quietly redirecting. She had my email forwarded to an account she controlled. She had my financial advisor convinced, through a series of very polite phone calls, that I preferred Lynette to handle correspondence. She got my signature on 3 documents I never properly read because I was tired, and she brought them to me at the end of long evenings with a glass of wine already poured, saying, "This is just the annual review paperwork, sweetheart, nothing complicated." I signed. I should not have signed, but I did. The documents gave her co-signing authority on the investment accounts, not the house. She didn't have the house yet. That was what the Sunday conversation was working toward. But the registered accounts, the TFSAs, the non-registered portfolio I had built over 30 years, combined, somewhere north of $800,000. She had moved $460,000 into a joint account that had then been transferred to an account in Brendan's name. Over 18 months, in increments small enough not to trigger automatic alerts. I didn't know the exact numbers yet. That Thursday in October when I sat in the truck, I knew something was wrong. I knew the tone of that conversation in my kitchen was not the tone of people discussing a family matter. It was the tone of people who had already decided. I drove to a Tim Hortons on Harvey Avenue. I ordered a coffee I didn't drink. I sat in a corner booth and I thought about my father who used to say, "Don't let them see you move until you've already moved." I called a man named Douglas. We had gone to school together in Vernon 50 years ago. He became a lawyer, family and estate law, semi-retired now but still sharp. I hadn't called him in 7 years. He answered on the third ring. "I need to talk to someone I trust completely," I said. "Then you've called the right number," he said. "Come by the office tomorrow." I told Douglas everything I knew, which wasn't enough yet. He listened without writing anything down, which I always respected about him. When I finished, he leaned back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "You need to know exactly what's been moved and when and what you signed." He paused. "And you need to stop letting her manage your communications. Today, that afternoon, I called my financial advisor directly from my cell phone. I didn't tell him why. I said I wanted a full account summary emailed to a new address, a personal one I set up that morning on my phone in the Tim Hortons parking lot, because sometimes the simple things are the right things. He sent it within the hour. I sat in my truck outside the financial advisor's office on Dixon Avenue, and I read every line. It took me 2 hours because of my eye and because my hands were shaking, though I'd never tell anyone that, for $62,000, gone in increments. The most recent transfer had been 11 days ago. I drove home. I made dinner. I asked Lynette how her day was. She told me about a problem with her sister's renovation. I listened and nodded and poured her a glass of wine and said almost nothing, which she interpreted as me being tired, which is what she always interpreted my silence as. I was not tired. I was the most awake I had been in years. Over the next 3 months, I did several things. I hired a forensic accountant through Douglas. Her name was Patricia. She was based in Kelowna, and she was the most methodical person I have ever watched work. She reconstructed every transaction. She identified the 3 documents I had signed and determined that 2 of them had been altered after my signature. Not dramatically, but enough. A date changed on one, a clause modified on another. That is called fraud. In Canada, that carries real consequences. I also installed a small digital recorder in the living room, not hidden in a plant or behind a painting like in the movies. I put it inside the base of the old clock on the mantel, the anniversary clock Lynette had given me for our 5th year together, the one with the glass dome. She never looked twice at it. I replaced the battery every 3 weeks. I had that recorder running for 61 days. I am not going to describe everything I heard on those recordings. Some of it was routine, phone calls about nothing, Brendan complaining about his mortgage. But some of it was not routine. There were 2 conversations in particular. In the first, Lynette told Brendan she needed 2 more signatures, and that she was working on the timing. In the second, Brendan asked her directly whether she thought I suspected anything. She said, and I remember this exactly because I played it back probably 30 times, "He's checked out. He doesn't track things anymore. We have time." I want to be honest about how that felt. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years with a woman, in 2 different marriages now, and I know what it is to hear love. That was not love. That was the voice of someone who had decided I was already finished. That hurt in a way I still don't have the right words for, but I kept moving. Because that's what you do. In January, Brendan's wife, a woman named Tracy, let something slip at a family dinner. She mentioned that they were looking at a property in West Kelowna, a nice one, she said, With a view. She caught herself and looked at Lynette. Lynette changed the subject smoothly. I kept eating. Douglas filed the civil claim in February. We also brought in a referral from the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit, which Douglas said was appropriate, given the document alteration. The day the process server arrived at the house, I was already at Douglas's office. I had moved out the previous week while Lynette was visiting her sister in Calgary, taking only what was mine and leaving a note on the counter that said, "You should call a lawyer today." The hearing was not what I expected. I had pictured something dramatic. What it actually was slow and procedural and mostly boring to watch, I imagined, from the outside. Lynette arrived with a lawyer, a young man who spoke very quickly and seemed confident. Brendan sat behind her. Tracy was not there. The moment I remember came about an hour in. Lynette's lawyer was making an argument about the account transfers being authorized, that I had given consent through the co-signing agreement. He spoke for about 10 minutes. He was polished. Then Douglas stood up. He submitted the forensic report. He submitted the recordings, which had been reviewed and deemed admissible. He submitted the original documents and the forensic analysis showing the alterations. And he submitted something I had written myself 3 months earlier at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning, a 17-page detailed account of every transaction I could identify, every date, every conversation I remembered, written out in my own handwriting first and then typed up properly. The judge read quietly for a long time. Lynette's lawyer tried twice to object. The judge held up one hand without looking up. When the judge finally looked up, he didn't look at Lynette's lawyer. He looked directly at Lynette, and he said, in the most even, quiet voice I've ever heard in a formal setting, "Mrs. Calloway, I want to make sure I understand what's been presented here." She started to speak. He said, "I didn't ask a question yet." Brendan shifted in his seat. I watched him. He had his mother's chin and his father's eyes, and he looked, in that moment, like a man who had just realized the floor was not where he thought it was. The civil judgment came 6 weeks later. Full restitution of the $462,000, plus costs. The document alteration matter was referred to Crown Counsel. I don't know what will come of that yet. Douglas says these things take time. I am back in the house on the lake. The water is gray most mornings this time of year, the way it gets before the weather turns, and I drink my coffee at the kitchen table and watch it. My knee is still bad. I still repeat myself sometimes, though I've decided I don't care anymore. My daughter, who lives in Edmonton and who I called the night I filed the civil claim, flew out the weekend after the judgment. She's practical, like me. She didn't say much. She made soup and we watched a hockey game, and she said on the way to the airport, "Dad, I'm glad you didn't just let it go." I almost did. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I almost decided I was too tired for the fight. I almost told myself it was just money and that I was 68 years old and that it wasn't worth it. But here's what I know now. It was never about the money. It was about whether I was willing to disappear quietly into the story someone else had written for me. I was not. The clock is still on the mantel. I took the recorder out of it, of course. Now it just keeps time. The thing about the recording is that I almost didn't make it. I stood in front of that clock for a long time, thinking about whether I was the kind of man who does something like that. I decided I was, because the alternative was being the kind of man who does nothing and loses everything. That distinction matters more than people talk about. I've thought a lot in the months since the judgment about what actually happened in that marriage. Not the legal part, the human part. Lynette wasn't a careless person. She was intelligent and organized, and she paid attention to details. Those are not bad qualities, but somewhere along the way, she made a choice to point all of that intelligence in a direction that had nothing to do with honesty. And Brendan followed her, because it's easy to follow when the destination looks profitable. What neither of them calculated was that the same patience they mistook for weakness was the thing that would undo them completely. That's the part I keep coming back to. Cause and effect doesn't care about your intentions. It just runs. They built something careful and deliberate over 14 months, and I built something careful and deliberate over 3 months, and the difference was that mine was built on what actually happened. Truth has a structural advantage. It doesn't require maintenance, the way a lie does. You don't have to remember it. You don't have to make sure the other person remembers it the same way. It just sits there, solid, waiting. Douglas told me once, years ago, when we were still young men, that the most dangerous opponent is the one who doesn't react. I didn't understand what he meant until I was standing in my sock feet in the hallway of my own house, listening to my wife discuss the timing of my disappearance, and I felt something go very still inside me. Not cold, still. There's a difference. Cold is emotional, still is clear. I'm not holding myself up as an example of anything. I made mistakes in that marriage. I trusted without watching. I let convenience replace attention. I signed things I should have read. Those were my failures, and I own them. But I also know that when the moment came, I didn't panic, and I didn't collapse, and I didn't beg. I thought, and I planned, and I waited for the right time. That's not a special talent. It's just a decision you make about what kind of person you're going to be when things go wrong. My daughter said something at the airport that I've turned over many times since. She said she was glad I didn't just let it go. What she meant, I think, was that she was glad I respected myself enough to fight. Not for the money, though $462,000 is not nothing, but for the version of myself that knew what was true and refused to pretend otherwise. The clock still keeps time. I wound it last Sunday morning, standing in the kitchen with my coffee, watching the lake. It's a good clock. It was never anything other than what it was. I think that's the best thing you can say about anything. In the end, that it was exactly what it appeared to be. I'm 68 years old, and I'm still here, and the house is still mine. That's enough.